Hello, and welcome to the Godless Bitches podcast. Godless Bitches is a podcast of the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational group that promotes the I'm going to start this over. Welcome to the Godless Bitches podcast. Godless Bitches is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, which also sponsors the nonprofits and the Atheist Experience podcast. You can contact us at bitches@atheist-community.org. I'm your host, Beth Presswood, along with Jen Peeples.
Hi, everybody.
Tracie Harris.
Howdy.
And our guest, Tanya Smith of Atheist Alliance International.
Hi, everyone.
Atheist Alliance International has been around for a while and has recently split into AAI and its offshoot, Atheist Alliance America. And Tanya, you are the president, and when did you become president? Fairly recently?
That's right. It was at the time of the separation into AAI and AAA, so middle of last year.
Well, Nick Lee, who's president of AAA, did come and speak at the ACA, Atheist Community of Austin, about the split and sort of explain that it was really just more of a separation of the world. Basically, AAA will take care of America's things, and AAI will have more of a focus on international issues. Would you say that's pretty true?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It was a very logical evolution of AAI. People who were on the board before me did a great job at expanding the group and getting members from all around the world. And then about 18 months ago now, we looked at the group and you realised that we had roughly 2/3 of the members were in the US. Before I and a few others joined, all the board members were American. And so it was a bit of a dichotomy between the two. You had a group that had a history in the US and had had done a lot of good work on US issues, but it wasn't maybe properly representing all the international groups because there were 2/3 members, roughly 30 groups who were American local groups, and then all the other groups were national, like there was Atheist Ireland, Atheist Foundation of Australia. So we decided to split the group and have one group focused specifically on doing national issues in America, and obviously there's an awful lot that needs to be done there, and another group as a global umbrella. So Atheist Alliance of America is now one of our members, and it's a national group in the same way that a lot of our other members are national groups as well. It's it was a lot of work, but it was very friendly. We get along very well with AAA, and I think it's made a lot of sense to have that separation between the two, and we get on with helping our members around the world.
Right, and America's pretty rich in atheist groups. There's American Atheist and AAA, Freedom from Religion Foundation, all kinds of things you can really go to. Not so much in the rural areas and such, but if you want a national group, you've got it. So what's the state of the rest of the world as far as logic and skepticism and atheism? Europe seems to be all right.
Well, relative to the US, it is. You're right. The US has so many more national atheist groups than others, and maybe that's just because there is so much more work to do in the US. Relative to the US, a lot of the Western world, at least, is relatively secular, and yet still we have significant issues. In my home country, which is Australia, we have officially, like the US does, separation of church and state, but we have the same kinds of issues of religious education in classrooms. Thankfully, we don't have the same degree of push for sort of nutty creationists that seems to happen in the US. We still have people like that, but they're a much smaller minority. But we have the same kind of arguments around same-sex marriage, abortion, voluntary euthanasia. They just thankfully tend to be more at the liberal end of the spectrum than happens in the US. For people like me, we look at the US and kind of go, it is quite frightening that people like Rick Santorum can be even considered a mainstream politician, and yet he is. We do have kind of nuts like that everywhere else in the world, but they're a bit more of the fringe. But then if you think about the rest of the world, more the developing countries, they'd be thrilled to live in a place like America, even with all the work that needs to be done there. We talk to people and get emails from people in places like Pakistan and Nigeria and things like that. And these are situations where it is physically dangerous for people just to be an atheist. They're fighting against really old superstition, things like witchcraft. In Nigeria, they're fighting against people who think the punishment for blasphemy or apostasy should be death. In places like Pakistan, so there's a depressing amount of work to do all around the world.
Yes, certainly, and definitely agree with you on the Santorum and such. But you did give us Ken Ham. Australia did.
Yeah, that's just embarrassing.
So, what are your plans for AAI as far as the coming years? I think your term is 1 year for now.
It is. I'm running for the board again this year, and I certainly hope to stay involved. What AAI does is really broad. I mean, we help our members directly, and we work on atheist projects that get people involved outside their own country, which is typically helping atheists in the developing world. So I guess the base is continuing to do what we're already doing, which is helping new atheist groups start up wherever they are. Someone once described us as a bit of a general atheist consultancy, and that's probably quite accurate. I mean, we're a bit of a central point for information sharing amongst all our members, and we get all kinds of queries about atheism from the public, which ranges from people preaching at us to people looking for information for research, and good people actually interested in finding out what atheism is. So we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to run our conventions program. We've got 4 conventions coming up this year, 1 in Australia, 1 in Canada, 1 in Germany, and 1 in the Philippines that we're involved in. We want to continue that. These are great ways to raise the profile of atheism and the credibility of atheism and secular issues in the relevant countries. So we want to continue that. We support a humanist primary school in Uganda. So we will continue to facilitate the student sponsorships and the contributions to the teacher salaries. That is fantastic. This is a group of people running a humanist primary school in a heavily religious country and competing with religious schools for students. So it's a wonderful program, and we want to keep supporting that. We are in the process of applying for consultative status at the United Nations and the Council of Europe, because we want to have a specifically atheist voice at those organisations. So there's quite a lot going on. Broadly, it's continuing what we're already doing, which I think is good, and helping our members, and also expanding with things like the UN. And from time to time, projects come up. Unfortunately, they're usually in response to difficult situations. For example, there's an Indonesian man called Alexander Ann, who was beaten up and thrown in jail for posting "God does not exist" on Facebook a couple of months ago. So we've been writing letters on his behalf. We've been fundraising to help with his legal fees. We're in contact with local atheists, just trying to do what we can to help him. It's unfortunate that a group like us even needs to exist. The world would be a lot better if we didn't need to exist. But there's plenty of work to do.
Excellent. And we'll just stop here for a minute to let you tell everyone about your sites, where they can join you, give money, things like that.
Certainly. The website is atheistalliance.org, so you can find all the information there under the heading of Support AAI. There's memberships and donations. And look, we really do appreciate people who contribute. We are entirely run by volunteers. There's 12 directors in 7 countries around 5 continents. We basically run through email and Skype, and the more support we have, the more good we can do.
Great. And so what do you see as some of the biggest threats internationally to secular people and secular issues?
Freedom of expression is a pretty broad one, because there's a pretty good chance whenever atheists talk, someone is going to claim that they're offended. And in a lot of cases, I'd say this offence isn't justified. People get upset over drawings or cartoons, or even just atheists existing. I know there was an issue with a billboard that was proposed in the US recently, and all it said was atheists, and then it had the names of the groups and I think their websites, and that was it. And it was refused advertising because it was too controversial and might have provoked controversy. And it's like, all that says is that atheists exist. That's not really a controversial concept when you think these are citizens of the country. They certainly have a right to exist. But this idea about people being offended comes up all the time. I mean, I mentioned Alex Ann in Indonesia. In January in London, there was a group called One Law for All who was running a talk on Sharia and human rights, and that was cancelled after a man came in, filmed people, and threatened violence if Muhammad was insulted. The talk was eventually rerun. Actually, I think it was just last week. But what we're talking about is people just trying to stifle debate. It is absolutely ridiculous to object to someone talking simply on the basis of, oh, well, I might be offended by something you say. I am offended by religion all the time, and yet I don't claim that they should stop talking.
Right. And I think, the thing about the billboard, I posted about it today. We knew it was going to happen. That is why that billboard was proposed, because it is the very existence of atheists that pisses them off.
It's just insane. I think you obviously did the right thing by making the point, but you just look at that and go, what do you got to do? And the answer is you've got to keep being active. We get absolutely nowhere if we sit around. So I think it's fantastic that people are continuing to push. I know it's a lot of work, and obviously most of these things are done by volunteers on top of everyone's day jobs and lives and things like that. But I greatly admire the people who are doing things like organising the Reason Rally. It is so important that atheists get together and get organised, because religious groups are very powerful and they're very good at lobbying, and they've got an entrenched position in society that needs to be stomped on.
Oh yes, like the way you think. So one question: this is a feminist show. What is the role of AAI in promoting women in secularism and fighting women's oppression by religions such as Islam? And does AAI even have a foothold in some of these countries where women are oppressed?
We have members in some of these countries. I mean, we have, interestingly, the Pakistani Atheists and Agnostics, which officially launched last year. And I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but I didn't recognise the gender of the name that came to me in the emails, and I did assume that it was a male. It is very rare to hear from women in countries like that. But in one of the replies, they said, by the way, I'm a 20-year-old female student. And I was like, oh, that's, completely my fault. I really should not have assumed. So we do have members in these countries. We help all our members with whatever they need. I think women's rights is probably one of the broadest concepts that underpins a lot of the I suppose it underpins a lot of the problems, and therefore it's something that definitely needs to be targeted. Do we have specific programs on it? We work to help our members, so we very much support our members in what they do, and if they are running a campaign that supports women's rights, I'd be absolutely right behind it. I think it's important, a little bit like the freedom of expression issue, because it has such a broad implications. If you can push for the right of women to not live under a sheet in certain countries, to have voting rights, to be considered a reasonable member of society, you push forward on a whole lot of other things, because it's women's right to control their fertility, around contraception and abortion issues, that allows them to take an active part in society. And without those first steps and women getting an education, their ability to contribute and to even have, I guess, the time and the ability to try and take the next steps about participating in society and having jobs and so forth becomes hard. So it's a huge topic. And certainly Atheist Alliance International supports the kinds of issues where the religious and the atheist tend to meet and clash on women's rights.
Right. And Jen and Tracie, you feel free to jump in any time now. If you, I know me and Tanya are just going at it. So
no, I think she's got a lot to say, and it's probably good to just let her talk.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, great. Well, I actually have kind of on that note a question, kind of a hard question. I think. Do you think that burqa bans and face veiling bans do more to, are they something that a secular society should do, or are they just going to hurt more women?
That is a really good question. And I must admit, I've kind of gone on both sides of this issue at various times. I have ultimately come down in favour of banning the burqa in public. And in some ways it rankles a bit because there's this issue of personal choice. But ultimately I look at it and say, religious freedom is an important privilege, but it is not an absolute right. Yeah, and people who claim it is are not thinking the position through. I mean, if you go to the extremes, someone says, "Well, human sacrifice is part of my religion." No, that's not okay. So the question is where you draw the line. And when I think about the veil, I think, what is the underlying principle that I'm trying to protect here? And that is gender equality. That women have a right to be seen, to participate equally in society, to be considered the equal of man. And I don't think you can do that if you're living your life under a burqa. Even if you choose to be subservient, even if you choose to be considered lesser, or that the sight of your face, heaven forbid, might tempt a man into untoward thoughts, it is the wrong principle to say that women should be hidden away. So I think a very large proportion of the people who do this, I don't think it's really an informed choice. I think if you're brought up in a society and told this is how you have to behave, if you're controlled through, whether it's directly the fear of religion or just the fear of the people in your community, that's not an informed choice. So I think we as a society need to make a stand for those women and say, you know what, it's not right that you are hidden away like this. It's not right that you're not considered equal, and we want you to be considered equal. There are probably, there are certainly some women who, say, well, I used to live without a burqa and now I choose to live with a burqa and you're restricting my choice. And ultimately, yes, we probably are. And we're doing so because you make laws for society as a whole. You make laws for the greater good. There was a discussion about this issue in Australia maybe a year or so ago where women stood up for the right to wear a burqa. That was how they described it. But they did so at a rally where the men who were attending turned their backs so they wouldn't see the women as they were speaking. And I look at that and I just say, no, that's not the principles that I want my society to support. So ultimately, I think in a lot of ways laws are about sending a message about what is and is not acceptable. And on this one, I ultimately say, well, women should not be considered as any less than a man, and therefore they shouldn't be hidden away. And if we have to, it would be nice if we could just educate the world and there was no need to have a law like this. But if that's what it takes to send that message, then that's what we should do.
So should they be forcibly arrested and thrown into a police car and put in jail for how long?
It's an interesting question. I'm not so sure I'd really want to persecute women who are in this particularly difficult situation. I think throwing them into a police car and arresting them is the last, I suppose it's the last resort. I mean, would I actually consider a jail term for someone like this? No, I wouldn't. I mean, I'd be looking at a fine, and it's really, it's the statement that I want to make with the law rather than punishing people.
Well, I see a lot of arguments for and against. But one of the things, the law is supposed to be for punishing offenses, not necessarily for making a statement. And laws that are, flouted constantly, make poor statements. Those are not good laws. So I would wonder, I have seen estimates of that it would only possibly be a couple hundred women in where this was proposed in France that would even be affected. So is it necessarily that big a problem? And is it just kind of persecution? Is there some Islamophobia in there as well with some people? It's a hard question.
The thing that bothers me the most about it is that it ends up targeting the victim. She becomes a criminal now instead of just persecuted. So now she's persecuted and criminalized.
If you consider it, I suppose in the US the phrase is what a misdemeanor and a crime. But is it a crime that you go to jail for? I would be thinking about this as more, I guess, in the misdemeanor category. I would actually like to see this. I don't think this in and of itself is any solution. Like it's got to be part of an overall package. I would like to see, to the extent that you can. I mean, it's very hard to drag people in and educate them. But if there's a woman who's walking around under a sheet, probably with a man, because they're not supposed to go out without men, I would actually like to see the man she is with and her go through some kind of, I guess it's a community education program, and have this explain to them about why it's important that women are involved and why it's important that women are treated equally. It's true that laws are all about punishing people, but they're about punishing people for transgressions that are deemed to be dangerous to society. So, if you hit someone, it's like, well, that's not the society we want to promote, so we're going to punish you for assault. So they are, yes, about punishing people, but they are about punishing people for things that we deem to be dangerous to society as a whole. It is a really tough issue.
If I can just, reason that one of the things that bothered me was a video that I saw of a woman being arrested in France. She was by herself. She was in the burqa. She looked like she was out shopping. They dragged her fighting into a police car, took her away. And it strikes me as it almost seems to me like the police getting called into a domestic violence call, coming to the house and dragging the woman off because she's staying with someone that hits her and saying, we don't support that, so we're arresting her. And so when I saw it, it was just like, this doesn't make any sense to me. If the point is to help her, it's not helping her. It's making her life harder.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I'd see it as part of something that involved a community-based approach. I mean, you're right, dragging people into police cars who are, in fact, the victims is not a great way to do things. And I do think someone mentioned earlier the point about, is this partly related to Islamophobia? And I think that is true, and that's what makes it really difficult. Miriam Namazi, who works for the Council of Ex-Muslims in Britain, she's a fantastic speaker. She talks about this, and she said what's really hard is that the only people who are often saying that they're willing to challenge the Islamists on the things they do that are damaging to society are actually the far right, and their motivations are wrong. Every now and then they do say something that's sensible, but their motivations are wrong.
Sure.
And I found this in Australia as well. It hasn't really come up as an issue in Australia to any great extent. It has a little bit. But one person who did speak up in favour of the burqa ban was a guy called Fred Nile. And Fred Nile is, a bit in the Rick Santorum camp. The guy's just a horrible right-wing Christian who I would disagree with on just about everything. And so when he opened his mouth on this, it's like, okay, you are not doing this. I mean, he said, it's all about protecting the women. It's like, you're not trying to protect the women. You want them back in the home, which is, barefoot and pregnant somewhere. And you're doing this because it's cultural competition for you. You're a Christian and you don't like Muslims. And most of the fear that is whipped up around Muslims is utterly unjustified. I mean, they're just people like everybody else. But you do have this issue where sometimes people who are very well-meaning and liberal try to be accommodating because we all want to live in a pluralistic, tolerant society. That'd be very nice. But we're talking about people who don't necessarily want to live in a pluralistic society. And the danger of being too accommodating is you end up with things like the Sharia courts in the UK, which was put forward by people who were trying to do the right thing and with good intentions, but it has in fact ended up reinforcing the problem. I would really like to see the evidence that comes out of what's happened with the burqa ban in France, because you're right, it's a small number of people. France is very explicitly secular, and despite the influence of the Catholic Church here, and tries to be. So I mean, I could be convinced to go the other way if they say, look, we tried it, we did this. In the end, it produced the wrong results for these reasons, and it ended up not helping. I guess, I look at it and say, well, how do you stop it? How do you say that it's not acceptable without having a law against it? But in terms of enforcement of the law, I would really like to see it directed at educating the family rather than just approaching the woman, because she's not, probably in many cases, she's not just doing it for fun. She's doing it because she's part of a community and part of a family that expects her to do it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I find so disturbing about saying we're going to have a ban on this, is because I think most of these women have not, as someone previously noted, made a conscious choice to wear a burqa. They've been indoctrinated to believe that this is correct for their whole lives, and so I think it takes a tremendous amount of education to break through that kind of indoctrination. And it's not just the women who need a lot of education. It's the men as well, and possibly especially the men.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
I think this goes to the broader point, and France certainly has this issue. It's certainly a Europe-wide issue about how do you integrate Muslim immigrants into society, and yet not try and just impose a culture on them, and yet try and take out some of the elements that are dangerous to society, like this idea that Sharia courts are a good idea. And I think it's kind of a long-term solution, which doesn't really help the women who are indoctrinated now. But your best chance is education. And this is one of the reasons that I very much oppose faith schools as a concept, regardless of what the religion is, because what you need to have is people being educated about the world in a very broad sense, that it's a pluralistic society and we all should live together. And certainly being taught how to think critically about anything that makes truth claims like religion. But if you can have children from immigrant families going into a broad and secular education system, I think you will end up with a very large proportion of those children not coming out and thinking that wearing a sheet over their head is a good idea. But that's a very long-term program, and it's hard because you've got to try and manage and educate the people in the meantime who, you're right, haven't had access to that kind of education and haven't seen that they do have a choice and they should have a choice.
Well, the other thing, though, is indoctrination. Whether a person's been indoctrinated or not, ultimately, if they accept that, if that takes, in their head, that's as much their thinking or their decision as they can understand. I mean, having come from a background of indoctrination, I know that if somebody had told me that I was brainwashed at the time, I would have been offended by that and said, no, I'm not. To me, those were they were a lot like real thoughts. Now that I think for myself, I see the difference between what it is to have a belief versus what it is to have an indoctrinated belief. It's a different thing. But you don't know anything else when you're indoctrinated. That's what you know. So you think this is a belief, this is my belief, but even though you didn't really come to it, and then later when you start to come to beliefs, you realize there's a difference between beliefs you form independently and beliefs that are drilled into your head by an objective outside reality. And what I think gets me is that at the point they're adult, if they are accepting of this culture, whether it's correct or not, whether it's indoctrinated or not, whether they've been brainwashed or not, is this woman going to be comfortable walking around without this burqa? Or is she going to feel naked in society? I can't, to me, it's almost like a thing that you can't compel. Because, for example, there's a nude beach here in Austin called Hippie Hollow. And there are some people that live here in Austin who born and raised in the U.S. who say, oh, my God, I could never, ever be naked publicly. Never. I would die. Now, to me, I think that's sad. It's really sad. You really couldn't get naked with a bunch of strangers at a lake? Like, really, that would just humiliate you. But it would humiliate them. And if I forced them to do it, that would be really, anti their nature. And it may not be the nature they were born with, but it's as much their nature. It's almost like the conversations we've had about, are you born gay? Are you, is it nature, nurture? And my whole point is always, does it matter? It's so ingrained. Does it matter?
Oh, I guess the point is that whether you fall over the line or not doesn't matter. And I think it does matter because of the signal it sends to other people. And that's partly about looking at the next generation as well. If you've got children growing up and seeing that every time a woman leaves the house, she's got to wear a burqa, that's teaching the next generation that that's how these things work. Whereas if you see a generation growing up that women have to leave the house, women leave the house and they're not covered, I think that you've got a better chance that the next generation will be very relaxed about it. And there would be unquestionably some women who would be very uncomfortable because of their background. I can't deny that. It's just, I look at it and go, overall, what is better in the long term for society? Because society is in no way damaged by you not going naked at a lake. I agree. It would be great if everyone was comfortable with it. I must admit, I haven't done it myself, but I'd like to think that I could. is society damaged by women walking around in a burqa? I think it is.
But certainly, it's a reflection of our moray that we have people that are uncomfortable with their bodies. I mean, to me, that is damaging. I think it's wrong. And I think that those people have something, I would say, quote, wrong with them. They have been taught something. They have taught to be ashamed of themselves. And I don't think that's okay.
No, I don't think that's okay either. But I guess if I go into the street and I see women under a burqa, I am getting a very explicit message about that being an acceptable thing. I mean, I might not think it's acceptable. I'm an adult. I've thought about it. But if children growing up in that society might see it. Me not seeing someone at a lake, I suppose, would only be an issue if someone said to me, I couldn't possibly go to a lake. It's really, really horrible. I'd be embarrassed and humiliated, which I think is a bad thing. But I guess on balance, I'd say, well, forcing somebody into getting naked doesn't necessarily benefit society because there are obviously people naked at the lake already, whereas seeing a woman covered under a burqa is sending the wrong message every time it happens. But
there are people walking around in society that are not wearing a burqa already.
Which is good.
Right, but I mean, it's the same as the lake. I see more people ashamed of their bodies that are Western in the society than I do people ashamed to show their face because they're not used to going around without a burqa. We teach as much shame, and it's pervasive in our culture. There's a lot of people that would be uncomfortable taking off their clothes. My point is, if the person that would be uncomfortable taking off their clothes, I would no more pass a law forcing them to do so than I could pass a law forcing her to go what is essentially naked in her mind.
Yeah, look, I understand your point. I guess the way I see it is the bigger point here of gender equality, which is something I think society should stand positively for. Should society stand positively for people being comfortable being naked? Well, yes, and that would be a good thing too. I guess
that's not really my point. My point is, would we pass a law forcing people that were uncomfortable to be naked to go naked? And I would not do that because that would violate that person in a way that would make them they're not able to do that. Their head will not let them do that. It's too much of a personal violation to try to force a person who would be that uncomfortable to do something like that. And that's what I see doing to this woman that's in the burqa. We treat it like, oh, it's just a face. But we're not thinking in terms of how do we feel when we're revealed in a way that we're not used to. And there are people in our society that would just literally die of embarrassment. Well, I guess I shouldn't say literally because maybe you can't die of embarrassment. They would be as humiliated as possible. And making them be naked would be such an egregious thing to do to a person that couldn't. It's almost like throwing somebody into the object of their phobia. I just would not force a person into that situation. I just don't think that I can. And I agree that I definitely agree that the issue has to be addressed as far as the gender discrimination and what's being happening here. And I do support education totally. I'm totally for it. I just can't see putting this woman in a situation where she can no longer go outside or she has to go around in essence naked. I think that's an impossible choice for her.
I'd be interested to see the evidence that comes out of it in a few years because, I suppose if you got to the point that a ban tended to radicalize the community and just no women went outside anymore, like let's say that reaction happened, you could look at it and say, well, okay, it didn't work. It's a bad idea. The forcing aspect of it, which you've certainly highlighted, is in practice coming to the fore more than the fact that if women do take a step that makes them uncomfortable, you know what, hopefully they'll realize it's not so bad and they'll teach the children that it's not so bad and we will actually make progress. I guess I'll wait and see what the evidence is.
Yeah, we had a lot of, horrible issues in the U.S. I'm not going to say that it's resolved, but it's certainly not what it was, 50, 60 years ago with racism. And you can pass all the laws you want to keep somebody from discriminating in their business, but you can't, there's some places that do, I guess, pass laws against racist language. Here in the U.S., you can say whatever you want. A person can be as racist and talk as racist as they like. And yet, even with that, in the last half century, racism has gone, and not in every area, and like I say, it's not a perfect thing, but it is certainly far less acceptable now to be a racist out in the open than it was 50, 60 years ago. Now, if somebody opens their mouth and starts to be racist, a lot of people would be shocked by that, even in southern states. Whereas, 50, 60 years ago, you were mainstream.
Yeah. I guess it just tells you that humans are slow learners.
Well, or quick learners. I mean, that's a lifetime. You're talking somebody's lifetime that we were able to change attitudes without making it illegal for people to be racist or to say racist things.
I think given the freedom of speech issue, it would be very hard. I mean, well, obviously you can't really outlaw what people think in their heads at any point. And I guess there are steps in the direction of outlawing some forms of speech with hate speech legislation, but
sure.
It is very hard to limit what people say. I mean, you have to listen to a whole lot of crap if you want your right to speak too.
Well, and in some cases, I think we don't really want to stop these people from saying the things they say, because the more they talk, the more outrageous they look, and they're their own worst enemies when they start talking. So it's
I'd like to think that's true. I mean, you look at Rick Santorum, and he says some absolutely horrible things, and his poll numbers go up, and so. But I think you're right. I mean, ultimately, you can't stomp on problems by being quiet about it. You actually have to let the crazies talk. And point out how crazy they are.
Yeah, and actually, Rick Santorum plays well with a very specific demographic, and it's kind of interesting because probably 40 years ago, he would have been unacceptable in the South because he's Catholic. And so they would not, and I know people who still don't consider Catholics to be Christians. So, it's
funny, isn't it?
It's watching Rick Santorum. It's been a fascinating study in American politics right now.
Well, I actually think that the far right has started to lean more toward the Catholic perspective.
Yeah.
When it comes to women's issues.
Yeah, they really have.
Well,
it's not the other way around.
Yeah. Especially on the birth control issue.
Yeah.
Because a lot of even the very fundamentalist Protestant religions for the longest time have had no issue with birth control.
Yeah, I don't remember it ever being an issue.
Yeah,
and now it's everywhere.
This is like the central issue is birth control.
Well, the war on women is more important than anything. It is more important than the basic tenets of their theology.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't believe Catholics are Christian. They believe they have an entirely different theology and soteriology and plan of salvation, all of that. But the war on women is more important than anything else.
I almost wish that you could get a recording of what fundamentalist preachers say about Catholics when they're in their churches. I would love to have Catholics hear that dialogue.
Well, look at a chick tract. And I'm sure that stuff's on the net. I mean, it's out there.
It's not. It's worse than "You're Not True Christians." It is way worse.
The
Catholics are just that Pope is the Antichrist.
Yeah,
that church is Satan's army. They are idol worshiping heathens. It was just like you name it, and a Catholic is being maligned in a fundamentalist church for it.
Yeah, the Catholic Church, I've heard them referred to as, the Catholic Church as a whole referred to as the whore of Babylon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all kinds of stuff.
But boy, they come together when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
From an external perspective, it is really bizarre to look at, and I say this external because I've never been religious, but I was brought up in, where in a country where Christianity is the most common, variants of Christianity is the most common version of religion. And you look at it, and I read that the Catholic Church exists because years and years ago, there used to be, I think it was 5 people who were the most senior in Christianity. And the guy who was in Rome decided, no, none of this 5 thing. I should be the one, I'm infallible. And so he basically created the Catholic Church so he could be the head of it and didn't have to share the power with a whole bunch of other people. And you just look at that and go, right, you're all working off the same book. It's a stupid book. It's got horrible stuff in it. But there are something like 8 main branches of Christianity and then just thousands of different sub-branches and all this sort of stuff. And go, if you can't even agree on what your book says, and I'm not really surprised because it's such a mess, how can you possibly use that as the basis for your own personal decision-making, let alone the idea that you can use it to influence legislation that affects everybody else? It's just such a stupid idea that I guess you have to be indoctrinated to think it's a good idea.
Yeah, the whole thing is crazy.
Well, before we get too far away from that women in burqas issue and the whole being offended by the mere presence of atheists, just wanted to make a comment that these two issues have something very much in common. The idea behind the burqa is you render a woman invisible or at least irrelevant in public life. And the whole idea behind this offense at the mere mention of the word atheist is that for the longest time, theists have walked around in public life and they've been able to ignore the fact that there are people who don't believe. And to put a billboard up that says atheists and list the groups is so in your face for some of these guys. They're so accustomed to walking around and pretending that there are no atheists in foxholes or politics or, in the diner sitting next to them or anything like that, that to have that right there is just intolerable. And so I think that, they share this common thing of let's take the thing that we're the most uncomfortable with and make it invisible and pretend it doesn't exist. And for a woman to take her burqa off and for an atheist to put a billboard up is just so in your face. It's not playing by their rules. We're now making them extremely uncomfortable.
It is funny. There's this theme, this constant theme of societal bullying and pressure so that you get this faction that will bully and intimidate the minority into silence and invisibility. And then the majority claims that everybody's on board.
Well, and to me, it's not even bullying. It's more like a full-on screaming, kicking temper tantrum.
Well, but it has been bullying. That's the thing. We get letters from people saying, if I live in a small town and I run a business, and if anybody knew I was atheist, I would lose my business because nobody would do business with me. This has changed over time. But what they're experiencing is just the pockets that haven't changed yet. Literally, this is how it was. There are times in history where atheist speakers and secular speakers were more respected, like Bertrand Russell.
Yeah.
But then you went through this whole McCarthy weirdness, and that all changed. And then atheism became a dirty word, and you had to hide. And you're lesbian and you had this whole thing where there was laws against homosexuality.
Yeah.
And you got prison sentences for it. And so people, and like in the Middle East where they'll brag about the happy families because of look at our low divorce rate. It's like, and what happens? How does a woman leave a marriage? Is it even really, possible for her to do so?
Yeah, she can leave, but she gets stoned to death.
If she doesn't want to burn in the street or have her in-laws cut her face off. They have this horror story happening in there, and then behind that, in front of that horror story, everybody's wearing a big fat smile and saying, "Look how happy we are." And it's like, no, you've got a nightmare behind that facade. And that whole smile is just a veneer. And you are in denial of what's really going on. And what's weird is that you could possibly be in denial of reality while you are putting on so much pressure to keep reality from infringing on your happiness. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think, stopping people standing up is all about just reducing their power, like you say. I mean, if no one can see atheists, if they don't talk and there's no comments in the media about them, then when you get to things like public lobbying for legislation and on whether it's on contraception, abortion, or any of the other kinds of things, then there isn't a group to oppose the religious. So yeah, you've got a very free ride if you can get people to shut up. And I think one thing I've always wondered about is why is there even a word for a religious offence? I mean, they've got this own special word, blasphemy. But people disagree about stuff all the time. And there is no special word for being offended at someone's choice of politics or choice of sports teams or anything else that people really care about. Yes, yet there's this word blasphemy that we're all sort of taught is a bad thing. And, you've got to respect their ideas just because they might get offended if you question their beliefs. And Miriam Namazi actually makes a really good point about this and says, look, you respect people. They do have the right to hold their beliefs in the sense that they shouldn't be persecuted simply for what they think. But you don't have to respect the beliefs. If the beliefs cannot stand on their merit, then they deserve to be attacked, particularly when they're damaging other people.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anybody here is going to argue that.
No, it's not usually controversial among atheists.
Well,
yeah, although we get the emails every week from the offended theists who and sometimes actually atheists who come up with this, well, you have to respect people's beliefs. And, we politely disabuse them of that notion. That,
they've made their beliefs such a part of their identity, though, that it feels like a personal attack when it's really not.
Yeah, that's true.
So they feel attacked, and they think they're entitled to some sort of apology or something because you said that what they believed was stupid, which they heard as you're stupid, which is not necessarily the case. I don't think all theists are stupid. I think they're misled, delusional, a couple different things, but not all of them are stupid.
No, they don't think about their religious beliefs the way they think about almost anything else in life.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I know some people who by no means meet the definition of stupid, quite the opposite, and yet they are religious. They do tend to be of the, shall we say, nicer variant on the spectrum of religion, but they are still religious. I agree. It's just because they don't apply the same standards of evidence and critical thinking to religion that they do to everything else.
So, Tanya, we've gotten off into a lot of different subjects, and that's great. This is just the way the show is. What do you see as the major fronts for the international atheist movement? For me, we've talked about Islam and, theocratic Islam and Islamic immigrants in Europe. We talked about the Catholic Church, and I think definitely fighting the Catholic Church is a big part. And then, there's Africa, and there's, witchcraft beliefs and superstitious beliefs and Christian churches going into Africa, all that. So what do you see as the major fronts?
Oh, there's so many, and you've done a pretty good job at listing quite a few of them, actually. Anything to do with freedom of expression, like Alexander Ann in Indonesia, I think is very important because it's one of those baseline issues. If you can't talk, then you can't make a difference. So anything to do with freedom of expression, I think it is quite critical. We also mentioned the stigma associated with atheists and how people are offended by our mere existence. So anything that attacks that, and that is visibility campaigns, whether it's billboards or conventions or being in the media. Probably, if you try and classify it by areas of attack, probably Islam is probably the biggest single one, although the Catholic Church is doing a very good job of coming in second in that category. And I think probably the reason for that is that Islam is a political movement as well as a religious movement. It was just a religious movement, and it was just about people not eating pork or praying 5 times a day, then I think, I'd still think they were wrong and that they were wasting their time. But you get back to the point of, well, if that's how you want to live your life and it doesn't affect me, well, okay. But what seems to be happening in a lot of different countries, which I guess is what makes it an international issue, is the push for Islamists to live separately from society. I think what's happening in Britain, where they've set up the Sharia courts and effectively segregated the legal system on some topics for some people, is a huge issue. And that push, England is, I think, being used as an example for other people who are trying to do the same. There's people in Australia who are bringing this up as the idea of introducing Sharia courts, and I hope we will learn from the mistakes that have been made in the UK and not repeat them. But that issue is coming up again and again across Europe because of simply the number of Muslim immigrants. So those fronts, and then probably, if you talk again in broad terms, it's women's issues because they feed into everything that we do. You cannot disenfranchise half your society and expect to have a productive, happy society. And even in pure economics terms, and this is a lot more than just economics, but the societies that have given rights to women are those that have advanced far more quickly, because you can't have half of your country being an economic drain and half of your country involved in repetitive breeding, effectively, which is what happens when women don't have access to education and contraception and abortion and things like that. So, hey, if we could knock off those issues in my lifetime, I'd be pretty amazed. But overall, we are making progress. It's just we're fighting on an awful lot of different fronts, and there's so many different groups and different approaches to fight that it's a huge amount of work for everybody.
Mm-hmm. All right, another question. In Europe, in a lot of countries, they don't actually have separation of church and state. There are state churches. And that just seems mind-boggling to me. And how do you fight, encroachments of the church and religion if you don't have separation of church and state? Because, here, if there's prayer in a school or whatnot, separation of church and state. You can sue, you can get the Freedom from Religion Foundation involved in the ACLU, and you can stop it. And I know the problem isn't as bad over there, but still, without that legal basis, how do things get done?
Well, you're right. I mean, England is probably the obvious one, where the Church of England is the official church. As a matter of practicality, it's about changing people's attitudes, because even if you, say, can have faith schools, and that's you can have faith schools in the UK, and part of that is because that they do have an official church. But the fact that Church of England schools exist has been used to justify the introduction of other faith schools, because they say, well, we want to be fair and treat people equally. So the only way to attack it really is by changing public opinion. You don't have the same degree of legal support. In fact, the point about prayers came up recently because there was, I think it was a city council that got banned from saying prayers in the UK because it was deemed not appropriate for a particular religion, Christianity obviously, to be elevated above all the others. And yet one of the arguments against it was, well, I can say prayers in the UK Parliament. And I was looking at that and going, prayers in the UK Parliament, yeah, I guess they can, because they don't have separation of church and state. But it's all the same arguments that are used in the US are used in a lot of different situations in Europe. But ultimately it comes down to public support for them. And you're right, in some countries there is less legal basis for it, and you're coming back to the basic principles of equality for all citizens to justify secularism. But it is kind of ironic, really, because the US does have a good separation of church and state and hundreds of years of judicial history, yet you're still fighting all those kinds of battles much more regularly than seems to happen in Europe. It seems to be that, I guess it's just the historical process where religion has been more constrained in Europe. I don't know, I guess, enough history to know why the US is so much more religious than other Western countries, given that it was settled by the English not so long ago. But
it was settled by Puritans. And I think some of the theories have been that religion sort of has a free market here. If there's a state religion, it gets kind of soft and doesn't have to compete whereas all of our religions have to compete in this big free market, which makes them kind of innovate and change. And
well, I mean, if you think about it, the churches here are struggling. The ones that are, I mean, don't get me wrong. We have, like, for example, the Freedom from Religion? What's the
Freedom from Religion Foundation? Yeah.
Yeah, is that the one that's, or is it the Americans United for Separation of Church and State? That's what I'm thinking of. That's headed by a fundamentalist preacher.
He's not fundamentalist.
He's not fundamentalist.
He's Church of Christ.
The liberal
Lynn.
version of it.
Yeah, liberal Church of Christ is pretty.
Well, there is a more mellow flavor of it. I think the United Church of Christ or something like that is.
But he heads up a separation, so I don't want to malign. It's not every Christian doing this, but I think the Christians that do want to impose some kind of theocratic government, what they're actually fighting for is the status that the churches have in Europe, which is this tie to the state. They have to fight for it here because they can't have it. If you have it already, you don't have to fight for it. And it kind of goes to what Beth was saying about you can get lackadaisical when you already have everything. I mean, if you've got that tie and you've got your faith schools and you've got your integration into parliament and you're half the monarchy, and it's like, well, okay, I can just kick back because I'm integrated. Well, here they're not integrated and they want to be. And so that's what they're pushing for.
Well, and I was just reading something recently about this issue about why the U.S. is so religious compared to other countries, especially given our separation of church and state. And what the research found is that this free market concept doesn't really tell the whole story in the U.S. One of the biggest things in the U.S. is fear. Basically, there are a lot better social support systems in most Western European countries. Some kind of universal health care system in most Western European countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of, other social safety nets.
Yeah.
And if you look at that and the effect it has on income inequality, there's much less income inequality in Western Europe than there is in the U.S. And so that sort of economic uncertainty and the fear surrounding this, that actually causes people to be more religious. And then the church brings itself in as the answer to this. Oh, look at all this charitable work we're doing. We're trying to help the less fortunate. And so it basically sucks people in, and it makes them reliant on the church for things that really a functioning government should provide.
Yeah, society should provide it. Yeah, I agree. And if you look at it, I mean, conservative, the more fearful you are, the more conservative you become. Yeah. This is not a shock. There's nothing shocking. It's like if you are, this is even if you look at like a financial advisor and you ask them, the person's fear of risk is going to determine how conservative they are with their money, right? I mean, that's what conservative means. It's like you're afraid of risk taking. You're afraid of losing the money, and so you want to make real conservative decisions. You don't put your money in anything you can lose it. I could lose my money. So no. I don't need to make a lot of money. I just need to not lose what I have. The more fearful you are, the more conservative you're going to lean. And that's what conservative means. It means that you're not willing to risk take.
Yeah. So that's actually a big driver of
that's really interesting. From an external perspective. A lot of us do look at the US, and it's quite scary that the lack of universal health care and how much people are fighting over Obamacare and so forth. Whereas I was lucky enough to grow up in a country that we introduced universal health care. I think it existed a bit previously, but there was kind of a universal system introduced in the 80s, and pretty much everybody sees that as a good thing. It's good to take care of people if they need health care. But I can see what you mean about the churches filling a gap, and it's a good point. Thank you for educating me.
And it's a gap that the church needs to exist in order to justify itself. So believe me, they are going to fight to make sure that we don't get universal health care.
Oh, I've actually heard religious people make that argument that when the government is your religion, or the government's your daddy, or the government's your husband, then you don't have to rely on other people, and then you don't need them.
Well, they do the same thing with charity. Basically, what they do is they undermine the idea. Like, for example, I'm happy with my tax dollars going to fund, for example, homeless shelters. I would be thrilled. Like, where do I sign to extend our homeless, shelters? Because I'm tired of seeing homeless people on the medians at every street corner here in Austin. It's a shame, and it's an embarrassment, and the city should be humiliated with the number of homeless people that are here in Austin. And we should have accommodation for this. There should be some solution for this. And I have no problem with society coming together. The government is our tool as a society to fix problems that are social problems. And these homeless people out on the street every day are that is indicative of a social problem. So we need to fix this. I would love to see shelters, but you will get letters to the editor where some person is saying, if you make me pay in my tax dollars to fund this homeless shelter, then you are taking away like what it means to be a philanthropist and what it means to be charitable. And you don't let me express my charity by taking it out of my taxes and forcing me to pay it. And it's weird because if you look at some of the stats, and I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so it's not like I brought it to the table, but there are some stats that show that religious people are very charitable. So they will give up their money, but they will not give it up in tax dollars to help the homeless shelter. They want to be able to do it through their church. They do not want it dealt with through the state, and so they will never let the state fix this.
Well, they want to control it. They don't want it to go to the wrong type of people.
Well, not only that, but if you give it to the state, you have a secular organization administering, the charitable services.
Correct.
And they can't hold your sandwich hostage until you hear the gospel. So.
Well, to me, I think the larger issue, though, is that they are making a problem in order to justify their existence.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing over and over again. They create these social ills. They will not let you fix it. And they will do everything they can to make the problem worse or to keep that problem in play so that they can say, we are the solution. And God is the solution. God makes it right. God can fix this. The church can fix this. We're so good. And it's like, no, you're the ones that have created, maintained this problem, made it impossible for anybody else to fix it so that you can claim to take credit for fixing it. You would rather let these homeless people starve on the street than have the tax money allocated to actually fix the problem and just let the ones you can help be helped, and the ones you can't, they just, whatever, screw them. So that you can say, we are the only people doing anything about it. See how good we are? No, you're not good. You're poison.
Mm. To what extent do you think this relates to what, as an outsider, I see as a very American principle of individual freedoms? And this is not a religious point, but it always amazes me that in the US there's arguments against compulsory seatbelt laws and compulsory helmet laws for motorbikes on the basis that, it's my life. I have the right to do what I want. To what extent do you think that plays into this? Well, it's my money. I want to choose it as well as it being a huge benefit for the churches.
I think that's a separate group. That's a separate demographic, and I think there's a lot less of them. I do see their point about the seatbelts and the helmet laws. The main reason that I would favor seatbelt and helmet laws has nothing to do with the individual who doesn't want to wear one dying. If someone doesn't want to wear a helmet, doesn't want to wear a seatbelt, and they get mangled or killed, that to me is their choice. But if I have to deal with that with insurance cost, now it becomes my problem. And so at that point where the state is mandating insurance coverage for vehicles, and we all become responsible for covering the cost of his $100,000 bill because he's in a coma, now I have a problem. And so now I have some say in whether or not you're wearing a seatbelt or a helmet. And it's like, look, buddy, I appreciate your individual rights and freedoms. And if it wasn't affecting my insurance costs, I would say power to you. Take the risk. It's all up to you. I don't care if you go through my windshield. It's cool. But If I have to pay for it,
Yeah, that's
no,
the
I'm
strongest
sorry.
argument.
No, you
Yeah.
know, so and then you can argue about whether or not they should mandate insurance. I don't, but in the end, they give you the license. The state issues that driver's license, and so they're telling you have to have insurance, and you have to have insurance. You don't have a right to a license. You have to go and pass a test for it. The state issues it. You can't drive without it. So they make the rules.
Well, and I guess that's where I come down on this. It's like, okay, as you said, you don't have a right to a license, but if you apply for the license and you get it and you choose to drive a car or ride a motorcycle, you accept the conditions attached to that. And one of that is that you've got to wear your seatbelt and wear a helmet and appropriate safety equipment.
I will say, though, that if we didn't have the vested interest in the insurance issue, like if it wasn't an additional cost to everybody else in society, and the state was using that license to force people to wear a seatbelt, I would probably oppose it. I would probably say they're not hurting anything. So, I mean, what's the difference? It's up to them if they want to take a risk.
Tracie.
It doesn't matter to me if they die, right?
I guess it depends on how you feel about the people in the middle. And I say this because there will be people who would always wear their seatbelts because, that's just the kind of risk attitude they have. And there'd be people who, would always complain about it and maybe even refuse to wear their seatbelts. So wouldn't you have all these people in the middle who hadn't really thought about it and like, the fact that it is mandated makes them go, oh, yeah, I probably should wear a seatbelt. So do you actually save people's lives or reduce injuries?
Well, I mean, I'm all for
by taking that choice away. I mean, it's a fine balance because it's the individual choice.
I would have no problem with them saying seatbelts save lives. It's just like a cigarette pack. You can put on a cigarette pack. This causes cancer. That to me is good enough. The person buying those cigarettes knows it causes cancer. You've done what you can. I'm not going to make them criminals for smoking a cigarette, but if they want to risk cancer, that's up to them. They know what it does. It's just like somebody eating too much or somebody that, doesn't want to work out or somebody. It's like we all do things that are probably not that healthy, but that's up to us, especially if somebody's telling us this is not safe. And I think anybody knows a person that riding a motorcycle that's not wearing a helmet, they know what happens if they hit the pavement. I mean, that's not news to them that, your head hits the pavement at 75 miles an hour. That's going to be some damage.
So
You're probably not going to survive.
Do you not have jaywalking laws and things like that in the US?
Sure we do.
Sure
we do.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's you could argue that falls into the same category, I guess.
Yeah, I think that all of that can be controlled via the idea of insurance. I mean, to me, insurance is the nail in the coffin. I mean, we've got to have it. It's got to be covered. Our healthcare system requires it. The medical costs are crazy. Somebody gets hit, we're all going to pay for that. And so, yes, I mean, we do. And also the idea, I think, is just that, this intersection, that is a point, I think, where a pedestrian, having safe walk zones for pedestrians and telling them, you can't cross here. We get people dying all the time on I-35. And if you've seen I-35, I can't believe anybody tries to cross that street on foot. It's not, it's nuts. That thing is like 4 or 5 lanes of crazy traffic 24/7. And there are, almost weekly, there's somebody getting hit trying to walk across I-35. I don't know if they're just nuts or drunk or, what they're doing. But it's a if you saw it, you wouldn't even think you wouldn't believe anybody would try to walk across it.
Tracie.
Yeah.
So I've actually seen data that helmet laws raise insurance because helmets save lives. They don't necessarily save brains. Whereas if you're on a motorcycle and you don't have a helmet, you usually just die.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
Helmet laws. They're causing trouble for the rest of us. They're costing you money.
They might be. I guess then you've got the issue of what does it do economically to take people out of society in their prime earning years because they smashed their head on a.
Oh, well, there you go. See, now we're back to square one. Now we have to figure out.
It's very complicated.
Oh, see, now I'm back to I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
And you've got to value social outcomes as well. I mean, what does it do to families to have someone die in their prime? I mean, then you've got people grieving. It's very hard to put numbers on those things.
Yeah, I don't think, not wearing a helmet or not wearing a seatbelt, those aren't like grand rights. Free speech, even the Westboro Baptist Church, I think they have a right to protest at the funerals, even though it hurts those
as long
families.
as they stay on public land.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, people are like, it is my freedom to not wear a helmet. They're just kind of.
No, I don't think it's. I mean, yeah, there could be people like that, but I think what they're saying is that the state should not be passing laws that are intended to. The state should be interfering where what you do impacts other people. And what they're saying is, what is the state's right to interfere here? And that's a valid question to me. Why should the state be interfering with something I'm doing if it's not hurting anyone else?
Right, and then what's the standard of harm? How harmful does it have to be before you legislate it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the justification for the drug laws. Is the idea that it causes so much social harm, like this is the theory anyway, it causes so much social harm when it's legal that it's just got to be illegal because it's just, it's rampant like harm and danger.
But the laws cause more harm.
Yeah, no, you're not going to get an argument with me. I'm just saying that's the idea behind things like drug law, because people will say, well, what's the difference if I smoke a joint in my house? And, my thought is, well, done. I don't have any problem with it at all. But the people that are arguing it are saying that when you have this legal, it causes so much social harm that we can't accept that cost. That's their argument. And so yes, when it gets to if there really was like some huge amount of social harm from it, then probably there would be an argument for saying, we had this legal and it was a mess, but right now we've got it illegal and it's a mess. And what's ironic is we have the same exact mess we had when alcohol was illegal. It's the exact same mess. It's like, okay, what did we do? We had to repeal it and say, wow, prohibition isn't working. But for some reason, when it comes to the drug laws, we are refusing. We are digging our heels in and saying, we're not repealing this. And it's like, wow, did we learn nothing from prohibition? Because we got the gangs, right? We got the cops being killed. We got, Mexico is insane, right? I mean, the violence down there is, out of control insanity with those drug lords. They are, you couldn't pay me to take a trip to Mexico right now. That's just scary. And and it's up in Texas, and it's like I say, it's all the gangs. It's fueling all the same stuff.
It's also missing out on some massive tax revenue. That's the thing I don't like about it, because you think, okay, there's all the money you spend on enforcement that doesn't really seem to be working, and then if you actually legalized it, controlled it, taxed it, you'd raise all this tax money, and then you'd also probably have a lot fewer social problems, and you'd probably have fewer people in hospital with overdoses and stuff, because if it was legislated and controlled, it would be regulated, and people wouldn't have the same issues of what's this been cut with, or how pure is it, or whatever.
I mean, you're always going to have people going for extreme things. You could make it as legal as you could possibly make it and still keep people in a safe zone, and you're always going to have somebody that's going to be willing to pay for that thing that is just dangerous and crazy. But you do what you can. It's like you've got to look at it, and with marijuana, it's like, okay, come on, mitigate this a little bit. This is not there's nothing worse than alcohol here. I mean, I don't see the difference.
Well, yeah, and Tanya's right. I mean, if you tax it, there's another source of revenue that can be used to provide all kinds of services, not only to people who are, using other drugs that might be doing them some harm, but also, other social programs that maybe we value more than we value.
I'm seeing a way to help the unemployment problem coming out of this.
Oh, I'm telling you. I mean, if they ever legalize marijuana, I mean, I don't smoke anything, but if they ever legalize marijuana, I'm probably going to buy a little patch of land and I'm going to grow some really good shit. Just because, I figure, hey, I grow tomatoes, I could probably grow some really good marijuana.
And those tomatoes are more poisonous than those pot plants.
I know.
Did you know that? The nightshade leaf is more poisonous than if you ate a marijuana plant.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, what I found out's really toxic? Parsnips.
We would have Godless Bitches brains.
Godless Bitches. It's that hard cider.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I will say that the people that are complaining about having to wear a seatbelt, I mean, come on, guys. It's not like somebody's shoving a vaginal probe up your vagina. So,
Oh, but that's okay because there's all these white men somewhere who said that it was a good idea because you
Someone
really
pointed
need
that
to
out
see
to
that.
me. Well, someone actually pointed out to me that they actually do the sonograms as a matter of course, I guess, is a routine thing in some of these clinics in order to tell at what phase the fetus is at, or I don't know the terminology, but they were like, so what's the problem? I said, the problem is you're mandating it. You're not giving the doctor the discretion. Like if the woman says, I don't want to do this, they might be willing to do an ultrasound instead or something. They can work with her if she has a problem, like if she's been raped and doesn't want something inserted into her, but if you mandate it, you're basically telling her she has to do this and the doctor and her have no discretion. I mean, it's forced. And you know what they told me? Oh, wait, I have to get this in. I didn't know that I wasn't quite getting what they were saying. But somebody inserted later and said, I don't think you understood what they were arguing. They were arguing that this is an elective abortion. And therefore it's not mandated or required. And so it's a choice. And I was like, wow, so they think this is a choice like teeth whitening? like seriously. I mean, this is a procedure that women have in the past died to get. Literally died in a back alley somewhere because they were so desperate to have one, because that's the negative implications of the impact it was going to have on their lives if they were pregnant. And they're saying that this is a choice. I just want to make it really clear to people that this is a choice in the way a kid that's allergic to peanuts is making a choice not to eat a peanut butter sandwich. He's not compelled by law to eat the sandwich, but anybody that thinks that it's his choice to eat it or not does not understand the gravity of what it means for a kid allergic to peanuts to eat that sandwich. And for somebody to take a situation where women were historically willing to risk their lives and willing to die from infections and botched abortions in a back alley and say that, hey, they have a choice here, it's not like they have to do this, you do not understand the pressure that some of these people are under when they walk into these clinics. They do not feel like they have an option. There's a big difference between calling it a choice because you're not legally compelled and pretending that they have real options in their lives, which is not the case. The choice applies only to the fact that the law does not compel you to endure the pregnancy or to have the abortion. Abortion is not compelled, pregnancy is not compelled. Therefore, it is a legal choice. That does not mean that the woman walking into that clinic has real, pragmatic life options. And I just want to make sure people understand that, because I ran into somebody that apparently doesn't.
Very good. Very good, Tracie. Yeah.
Well,
very good. Did you see the article today about the doctor who was advocating civil disobedience in response to those laws and just saying, look, you've got a responsibility to do what is right by your patient. This isn't it. You should be refusing to do the laws. If they, require you to show a photo of the sonogram, take a sonogram of the bedsheets. You actually, people need to be willing to do this. I mean, I feel quite sorry for the doctors being in that situation, but he was basically saying we are the last line of defense, because obviously the population has gone on elected some idiots who decided that this was a good idea, and it's gone through whatever process it goes through, and no one stopped it. We are the last line of defense. It was a really good...
To me, though, I just feel like there's this unbelievable lack of human compassion or sympathy or empathy. I don't even know what you want to call it. But just the idea of being able to grasp the gravity of a situation that someone else is in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't
fathom it.
What I can't fathom is all these politicians who stand up and they talk about Obamacare, and one of their arguments against it is that you don't want the government telling you what kind of health care you have to have. And then they go and vote for this law that mandates, a transvaginal ultrasound.
But then again, I mean, we were talking about the pressure. They put the pressure on, they cause the problem, and then they want to be like the solution. And it's the same thing here. Who do you think heaped on all the shame and social stigma with an unplanned pregnancy? Who's responsible for the like thousands of years of you are, you know, a slut and a worthless whore because you got pregnant? And who the hell's the father? Where is he at? You were sleeping with somebody, you weren't married? What the hell? You put this stigma on her that is like unbearable. And you wanted to put it on her. You want to shame her. You want to shame any woman that doesn't agree to not have sex. And when she gets pregnant, you then want to shame her because she wants to have an abortion. And look at that horrible woman. And it's like, yeah, boy, she's horrible either way, isn't she? She's a horrible freaking slut for having sex, and she's a horrible freaking baby hater because she wants to have an abortion. And you're the one that put that stigma on her.
And tried to limit her access to contraception.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is the other problem, which blows my mind, is you were irresponsible. To them, irresponsible means you had sex. And there's this whole area. I would like to take all these people that look at it that way and send them to a risk management course and let them understand that when you take part in anything, if you're going to live your life, that means you're going to incur risk. And what you do is you take steps to mitigate your risks. So in the case of I'm going to have sex, it would be like I'm going to take birth control. And that will help me mitigate my risk of pregnancy, which I don't really want to have a pregnancy. I'd like to avoid that. And it would be like saying I'm going to be a driver and I'm going to wear my seatbelt because I would like to mitigate the risk that I'm injured in an accident. So I know accidents happen. I know pregnancies happen. I'm going to take birth control. I'm going to wear a seatbelt. And so then you go out in your car and you drive and you go and you have sex. And then lo and behold, an accident occurs. And you have a woman who is pregnant and you have somebody bleeding to death on the highway. Right? You've got the guy that was wearing his seatbelt, but he's in a bad accident. He got hurt anyway. He's injured. He's broken bones. He's got, internal bleeding. You've got her. She's pregnant. She took steps, but she still got pregnant anyway. And now both of them are in a situation where the risk event occurred. So what do you do? What you do is called a contingency. You have a plan in place that is, if this risk does materialize, this is what I'm going to do. And so the person who's on the side of the road, someone calls 911, an ambulance comes, picks them up, takes them to the hospital where they do their best to fix them up and fix the damage caused by the accident. And so this woman says, I already knew before I had sex, I cannot have a baby. And so she's got her contingency plan, which is, I'm not having this child. I will not go through with the pregnancy. She doesn't have to go through with the pregnancy any more than this guy has to lay on the side of the road and bleed to death. So he goes to the hospital, gets fixed up. She goes and she has the unplanned risk that occurred also dealt with. The problem is the religious people see this. They have two a priori assumptions. Number one, they assume that all human life is equal, which not everybody agrees to. And number two, they're assuming that they've got the all life. That right to life outweighs every other right, which it doesn't. Nope. And there's plenty of examples when your right to life does not outweigh other people's rights to things that are not life, such as in Texas, if you're stealing my television set and you're in my house and I shoot you dead, that is completely legal. And so my widescreen TV and my right to protect my widescreen TV and possession of it outweighs your right to life. So right to life does not trump everything. And so they have these two a priori assumptions, which they have to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate that a person who's a vegetable in a coma is just as valid a human being as somebody who is, fully functioning. Because we'll pull the plug on that vegetable, right? But we won't pull the plug on somebody that's going to get better. And so you've got these assumptions that they make. But you've got this situation where basically what they're saying is if you take plans to mitigate the risk, and if you have a contingency plan in place in case that risk event occurs, this is standard risk management. It's considered to be what you should do in case of risk events. And yet to them, this is completely irresponsible. It's like, no, this is exactly how everybody treats risks in their lives. If they are responsible, you have insurance to protect your home in case of a fire. What the hell do you think that is? It's risk mitigation, right? I mean, you're trying to say, if this risk event occurs, this is going to mitigate my damages. You do this because what? Because you're responsible. But to them, they're saying the only right course of action is to never drive your car. You can only be responsible if you never drive. Anybody that gets behind the wheel is completely irresponsible unless they're married.
But Tracie, you're calling a baby a risk event.
It is a risk event, though.
It is. Yeah, it is a risk event. I mean, we had somebody write into the TV list not that long ago saying something about, it's not like pregnancy is, a dangerous condition or something like that.
No one's ever died from it.
Yeah, it's not like people die from this.
No one's ever gotten sick from it.
It's like, a woman risks her life every time she's pregnant.
Well, not only that, there's problems that she can have that she will always have. You can have problems that happen in your pregnancy that mess you up for the rest of your life.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Although you made the point earlier about women, all the shame that's heaped upon single mothers and so forth, and women not really having a choice when they're going to make an abortion. I mean, I think for a lot of women that's certainly true, but I'd go further and say, well, even if the woman is not in that situation and she's not feeling that particular kind of pressure because she's very fortunate and does have options, it's still her body.
Oh,
absolutely. Still up to her.
Yeah.
So it's. I'm not suggesting that I thought you disagreed with that point, but I just wanted to get that in there as well.
It's good to clarify that. I agree. I think my reaction was mainly to the person trying to claim that a mandate was not coercive because the abortion was, quote, elective. And I'm like, if we're going to use that reasoning, medically necessary, and put that in quotes, medically necessary abortions are elective too. Because they're not going to force you to have an abortion. The law doesn't compel you to have an abortion, even if your doctor tells you this is going to kill you. You still have a right to try to have that baby and say, I'm willing to die if it means that I might be able to give life to this child. There are women who make that choice and who do that. And it's like, this is, just because this is, quote, medically necessary does not mean it's legally compelled, which means it's her choice. They're all a legal choice, but different people have different situations, and you cannot assume that this is an option in the sense of any kind of real world option. This is an event that can ruin someone's life.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, Tanya, is there anything else you'd like to say about AAI? Pimp your conventions. Anything else you'd like to say about that? Because we don't really have a structured, show, but we are about an hour and a half in. So I'd like to let you get as much in about AAI or whatever you want.
I suppose it goes to just about everything we've been discussing the last hour and a half. I really encourage people to be active. Be active in your national atheist groups or free thought groups or whatever particular title you happen to like, because that's how you make a difference. The world isn't the way it should be. The world isn't as good as it could be, and we all want to make it better. And support groups like Atheist Alliance International as well, because there is a world out there that is more than just your own country, and Atheist Alliance International exists to help us all work together better at the international level. We achieve more together than we do apart, so let's get active.
Okay. And when is your next convention coming up?
Well, there's 4 that we're supporting in April and May. There's Australia in the middle of April and also the Philippines, and then there's Germany in May and Canada in May. So lots of good opportunities.
Awesome. Jen, Tracie, anything y'all would like to add?
I'd like to add just one thing. Mm-hmm. Tanya had mentioned that they were taking, I guess, a collection for legal fees for the guy who had posted his atheism in the Islamic country.
Yeah, in Indonesia.
And I had posted something about that on Facebook and gotten a lot of feedback. And there's a lot of similar things that I post, and I get a lot of feedback from people saying, how can I help? And I'm just like, I don't know, just make it as public as you can. But it's good to know that there's a group like yours that is fundraising for situations like this. And so I would just like to in case people didn't catch it, point out that you said that that's what your group is working on, things like that. And so people should take advantage of it. And if you are the type of person that sees it and gets outraged and says, what in the heck can I do to help this poor person stuck in this crazy ass country? Tanya's group apparently is doing something with it. So be sure to look her up.
And
thank you very much, Tracie.
You're welcome.
There's also the school in Uganda.
Yeah, that's a good thing to mention as well, because well, there's a couple of different things. We have student sponsorship, so you can pick a student at the school and pay for their school fees for a year, and it's only $125 for a whole year, which is not a lot. You can spend that on a good night out for those of us who are lucky to have those kinds of opportunities, and that's giving a child a chance at a proper science-based education.
Is that tax deductible? Is that nonprofit?
In the US, yes.
Great.
We just confirmed our 501c3 status, actually. So yes, US donors to AAI.
Good for you. All the more reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all beneficial for everybody. So you can donate. You can pick a student to sponsor. You can donate directly to teacher salaries, because that's another really important thing. They want to obviously get good teachers. They are paying them less than in some of the other schools at the moment because they don't have a lot of money. So anything you can do to help the teachers would be good. Or you can just make a general donation to the school, leaving it up to them how they spend it, or indeed a general donation to what we call the AAI Foundation, which is the umbrella title that we use to support usually atheist groups in developing countries. So as well as fundraising from other people, obviously for Alex and for the Humanist Primary School, AAI from time to time makes donations out of its own money, and that's what things like donations to the AAI Foundation support, whatever project we think we need to support at the time.
Has the donation fund for that school ever been featured with Foundation Beyond Belief?
Not that I know of, but that is a very good point.
Yeah, you should probably look into that. Foundation Beyond Belief. I try to talk about them a lot. Is a group of atheists and freethinkers who search out charities, and you can give them to them on a regular basis and determine which charity you want your money to go to, and they feature different ones. And it's just a really good way for atheists to get in the habit of giving, because that's one of the problems. Atheists are not more selfish than Christians or whoever. They just don't go to a place every Sunday where there's a collection plate passed.
Yeah, we get a lot of letters from atheists saying, I want to donate, but I can't find a group that's not religious. Can you help me find something to donate to where I can help and be a difference and make things better? And it's not going to be, thank God, it'll be, thanks for your check.
Yeah, Foundation Beyond Belief is great, and it's actually just set up in Australia as well, which is good. So you're right, now that we've got our tax-exempt status sorted out, which only happened in the last week after the separation, that's a very good point. Thank you. I'll get in touch with them.
All right. Well, it's been a good show. Really want to thank Tanya for coming here to be with us. And
yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was
no
great.
problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. And this is Beth. Goodbye.
This is Jen. Goodbye.
Tracie saying good night.
And
Bye,
Tanya.
everyone, from Tanya.
All right. Bye.